Man, they real man, not with the gay shit. You niggas sick and gross me out, transforming into a bitch. I don't want that dirty pussy, little mama. I ain't spending no a trick. Don't need you to put me on. I put myself on. Just came up on another lick. Bills paid, belly full, in lack for nothing. Nigga, do me, stay in my lane. Fuck trying to be another nigga with nothing. Brainwashed and continue lied to our social media. Censor everything real good into destruction.
How those who hypothetically lead us are failing to save the planet.
All the climate change indicators set new record highs last year.
The devastating impacts of human-caused climate change are happening now.
What is happening to our planet?
We are all confronted with a constant story about the catastrophe that faces the planet, particularly on the carbon front. It is simpler and, in some sense, more immediately morally rewarding to reduce the complexity of planetary management to the need to reduce our so-called carbon footprint. But the plain truth of the matter is that a multitude of troubles beset us, both economically and environmentally. How those who hypothetically lead us are failing to save the planet at this year's UN Climate Change Conference, known as COP27. Why 27? Because this is literally the 27th time that such a group has been convened. And as you will soon see or hear, very little has been accomplished and much time and money wasted in consequence. Global carbon dioxide emissions have kept increasing since the world's nations first committed to rein in climate change at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Despite dozens of climate summits and the global climate agreements struck in Kyoto and Paris, this is the case once again in 2022, when we will collectively set a new emissions record, while rich countries increasingly promise draconian cuts and then generally backtrack as they import huge amounts of oil, gas, and coal to save their citizens from energy poverty, as they have done most recently to address the current energy crisis. Most of the future emissions will come from the currently poorer countries in Asia and Africa as they power their climb out of abject poverty.
In the previous 10 years, the world has focused more on remediating climate change than ever before. Despite this, we're not achieving anything, although no shortage of money has been wasted. In a surprisingly honest review of climate policies, the UN revealed a lost decade. The report found that it couldn't tell the difference between what has happened and a world that adopted no new climate policies since 2005. Consider that. All those climate summits and grandiose promises, all that expense and trouble, and no measurable difference whatsoever. This state of affairs is unsurprising, unfortunately, because today's renewable energy sources have two big problems. First, they occupy a vast amount of space, often displacing nature. Replacing a square yard of gas-fired power plant requires 73 square yards of solar panels, 239 square yards of onshore wind turbines, or an astonishing 6,000 square yards of biomass. One study found that the United States would have to devote a land area 4 times the size of the United Kingdom to clean power to fulfill President Biden's promise of a carbon-free economy by 2050. Second, and of even greater importance, the two renewable energy technologies favored by the vast majority of environmental activists are intermittent or unreliable. Solar energy simply isn't produced when it's overcast or nighttime. Wind energy requires a breeze. We're often told by green energy boosters that wind and solar energy are cheaper than fossil fuels. At best, that is only true when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. On a windless, dark night, the cost of wind and solar power rises to the infinite.
It is for such reasons that it is deeply misleading, although highly convenient, to compare the energy costs of wind or solar to fossil fuels only when it is windy or sunny. It is also important to note that since all solar energy is sold at essentially the same time, when the sun is up and shining, its value drops dramatically. When solar reaches 30% market share in California, for example, as one study revealed, it loses 2/3 of its value.
Furthermore, because modern societies require 24 hours of non-stop power, backup is not optional. and that means reliance on fossil fuels when there's no sun or wind. As more sun and wind is introduced, more of our fossil fuel backups become ever more expensive as they offer their services for fewer hours to produce the necessary return on capital. And what are batteries? Globally, we have battery storage with current capacity to store 1 minute and 15 seconds of the world's electricity consumption. And that problem will not be ameliorated soon. Even by 2030, global batteries will only cover less than 11 minutes of the global electricity consumption.
And all of this just shows the problems with moving electricity away from fossil fuel. When Biden promises ambitiously that all of America's electricity will come from renewable sources by 2035, he is addressing the comparatively simple part of the climate challenge. Electricity constitutes just 19% of total energy use. We're far further behind in developing solutions for agriculture, manufacturing, construction, and transportation. Of these, the latter, transportation, is most often discussed by environmentalists and virtue-signaling politicians who insist that the solution is already at hand: electric vehicles. Despite massive subsidies, however, just 1.4% of cars globally are electric, and that number is not rising quickly.
I'm not saying that anyone must believe it. I don't give a damn if they believe it or not. That's their right, that's their choice, that's their uniqueness. The world was not run by the forces that we thought it was run by. If you think of a pyramid, at the top of the pyramid, you've got a tiny few people, which we now have a name for, the 1%. And if you look at how a handful of people now have the same wealth as the poorest half of the population, you can see the 1% ain't kidding. At the bottom of this pyramid is pretty much the rest of humanity in deprivation, and this is the word, in dependency on the 1%, because they don't have independent income. And between the 1% and the rest of the population, pretty much, is designed to be a vicious police military state to impose the will of the 1% upon the population and to stop the population rebelling against the 1%. And just to finish the point, this pyramid structure, the Hunger Games Society, again, has been saying it for so long, is designed to be run not by elected politicians, but by technocrats. Around the year 2030, humans will start to have their brains connected to AI. Now, if you look at that, mate, and then you look at the consequences of current events, then you can see that that Hunger Games society is vastly closer now than it was only weeks ago when this whole virus hysteria began. If you said to people, when you look through your eyes, can you see everything that exists in the space you're looking at? What they're going to say? They're going to say yes, but they can't. What we call the world is a ridiculously narrow band of frequency called visible light and the electromagnetic spectrum. And according to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum and visible light, which is the only world reality that we can see, is a smear of the electromagnetic spectrum. That spectrum, never mind visible light, represents about 0.005% of what exists in the universe. So we don't live in a world. We live in a band of frequency which our body brain can decode into a reality, a holographic reality. And therefore, infinity exists outside this narrow band of frequency, but we can't see it, just as when you're tuned to a radio station or a television station, you only experience that frequency, that station, that reality. What happens when you switch the zapper is you switch to a different, if you like, frequency, and you get a different reality instantly. We call them different channels. Now, these different realities operate in different bands of frequency. And just like radio frequencies, etc., these bands of frequency, as long as they're not too close on the dial to each other when you get interference, they can share the same space without being affecting all the others, and each one not even being aware that all the others exist. So we are basically experiencing a holographic television channel, which we call the world. And outside of that, all the other realities of infinite reality. And only when these realities get close on the dial do you get interference. And one of those areas of interference is what we call ghosts and paranormal things and such like. They can expand their frequency range that they can connect with beyond the normal range of human frequency. And they can tap in to frequencies that are outside of the normal human range, and you can pick up information from outside there that's not available here. Anybody can do it. It's just that this cult don't want us to do it, and that's why we're constantly pressured to perceive the world only through the five senses, which means only through this narrow band of frequency called physical light. To understand what is going on, we have to have some understanding of the nature of reality. Because if we don't, we will, quite understandably, dismiss things that are happening, but we can't perceive how they could happen. You believe the world is actually solid. Our bodies are solid, that wall is solid and not a holographic, illusory, physical. Then if the world is solid, then people moving between different shapes, what they call shapeshifting, is impossible. You can't shapeshift solidity, it's ridiculous. But if you believe the world is solid, immediately you hear some of the things that I say, they're immediately dismissed. Not possible. Well, hold on. If you look at computers and the technological Wi-Fi world we live in now, what you're looking at is a technological reality that mimics real reality, our experience reality, and how we create it. So you've got a Wi-Fi field. Okay, where is it? Where's the Wi-Fi field? Point it out to me. Well, I can't because you can't see it, right? Now, if you didn't know about computers, and I said to you, there is a field of information that we're living in, like a sea, people would say, well, where is it? I can't see it. Therefore, it can't exist. But because people know about computers, you say, you know, there's a field of information and you can decode. Oh, yeah, I know about that. Wi-Fi, that's right. And the only difference between that's rubbish, mate, and oh, yeah, I know about that is knowledge. Knowledge of what you are experiencing and what you're talking about in terms of reality. So what does a computer do? You've got a Wi-Fi field full of information in the form of radiation, basically. And the computer decodes it onto the screen. And you say to people, and it decodes it onto the screen, by the way, on the basis of the information you put in to decode onto the screen what you choose to decode. You say to people, tell me about the internet. And they say, oh yeah, well, it's pictures and graphics and text and all that stuff and websites. Yes, it is, but only on the screen. On the screen is the only place the internet exists in that form. Everywhere else, it's electronic codes and Wi-Fi. We decode reality in exactly the same way. The five senses take waveform information, think Wi-Fi, turns it into electrical information, feeds it to the brain, and there are different parts of the brain that specialize in decoding the different senses, and the brain decodes that electrical information into holographic digital information.